Cormac McCarthy's tough guy persona is a false mythos that the Blood Meridian Lit Bros, McCarthy's publishers, and even McCarthy himself love to pump up. This video will shatter all those beliefs by showing you that McCarthy was actually a sensitive and artistic type. And guys, I get it. I've studied McCarthy's work for 15 years. And it's every male's fantasy to think that a truck driving womanizer can become the artistic GOAT. And that's exactly why, in 1992, McCarthy and his publishers created a whole new WWE persona for McCarthy, help him hit it big in the publishing world because he was sick of selling 1,500 copies for every single one of his novels. Last week, the New York Times published a new article on McCarthy that gave us a new photo on McCarthy and bits of information that support this theory. So here's the segment of the article talking about all this. And look at this photo of McCarthy. I've never seen him look so goofy before. Quote, the lore around McCarthy metastasized when Knopf decided to heavily promote novel 6, All the Pretty Horses, which brought him what we call success. Along with an excerpt, Esquire published a list of rumors about him, that he had been a ditch digger, a truck driver, that he never spoke, etc. His author photos by Marion Ettlinger made him look ruggedly posthumous, cast in stone. In a profile in the New York Times Magazine of the era, McCarthy talks about venomous snakes and grizzly bears, as though he had briefly descended from horseback before riding off into the evening redness. But as with most great writers, the essential truth was plainer. He was a nerd for the art. In 2001, I received a letter that led me to this obvious after-the-fact understanding. My friend, the writer Guy Davenport, included some pictures of McCarthy and him from the 1970s. McCarthy was in maroon flares and a striped tank. He's jacked for a writer. Feathered hair and period-correct movie star sunglasses. For 20 years, the two men corresponded, the very period of McCarthy's obscurity. They talked about art and thought, from Heraclitus to Balthus, Walter Savage Landor to Ernest Mach, Ruskin to Wittgenstein. They discussed obscure books like Doughty's Travels in Arabia Deserta and Eckermann's Conversations with Goethe. By the late 1970s, McCarthy's first 3 novels were out of print, a situation he was trying to remedy. An outfit called Eco Press claims they'd like to issue my stuff in paperback. Do you know anything about them? In 1978, he told Davenport that he was revising the Western book. In 1981, still at work. Publication, 6 or 8 months. When 4 years later, that Western Blood Meridian, a straight-up masterpiece, did come out, it proved commercially DOA, selling just north of 1,000 copies. By 87, he was one draft into All the Pretty Horses. Finishing took another 5 years. How did he hold on? I have a peculiar trust, he told Davenport at one point, in the rightness of the actual. So everything we just read supports one of the main theories I talk about on this channel, which I would say I invented, which is that in 1974, when McCarthy moved to Tucson after leaving his second wife, Annie Delisle, he had a renaissance, not just a literary one, but a psychedelic one, a sexual one, an occult one, not a Christian one. Sorry out there to all the Blood Meridian Jesus truthers. And he also obviously had a scientific renaissance because he had so much more time and he had freedom away from not just his second wife, but his family and friends and environmental ties to Knoxville for the first time. And this is what's obviously explored in his fourth novel, Suttree. And if you guys want some Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy, hoodies, streetwear, long sleeve t-shirts, whatever, go to shortlore.com. I run a literature apparel website if you guys are interested in that type of thing. The link is down in the description below. I also run a Cormac McCarthy course with 11 hours of content just like this for $5 a month. Link down in the description below. But this tough guy persona we all hear about was not present during this time. Yes, he was going to pool halls and playing pool and hanging out with some degenerate types still. But he was also hanging out with Guy Davenport and talking to scientists. And someone who has a 7,000 book library and all these interests is smart enough not to have to play all this up. But during the 1980s, McCarthy peaks. And this whole era was a very confusing time for him because what do you do when you know you are the best in the world? In the late 1970s, early 1980s, McCarthy was one of the best writers in the world, but he was getting zero recognition for it. And He wanted to break into Hollywood. In the late 1970s, he wrote The Gardener's Son and Cities of the Plain. Those really went nowhere. And after Blood Meridian, he started working on Whales and Men, thinking that that would lead to something big. And all of it went nowhere. And that is a very hard thing to stomach. But McCarthy, once again, during this time period, was adapting and growing in obviously many different facets, but he was also entering his 50s. And when you're a man in your 50s, things can go in multiple directions. And for McCarthy, he wanted to go the settling down route. And in the late 1980s, McCarthy got with his eventual wife and mother of his son, Jennifer Winkley, who was in her mid-20s, just got out of a university program and into the arms of Mr. Cormac McCarthy. And when you look at photos like this of McCarthy with her, you can tell he's transcended some of those bigger ideas he had about art. Because with his first two wives, they were, with his first wife, she was saying, why don't you get a job? You can be a writer. I'm trying to be a writer too. And he was like, no, I'm going to do this. His second wife was saying the exact same thing, like, bro, please, let's live a normal life. Like, write some airplane thrillers. Let's make some money. Go do some of these presentations. And she was nagging him about it. And according to her, that's why he eventually left, because he wasn't supportive about his writing. And so McCarthy gets with the hot girl. McCarthy gets with the girls in her mid-20s who doesn't care about security or any of these things yet. But Daddy McCarthy obviously wants to be able to take care of her. And he earned $1 million in today's money in 1981 from the MacArthur Fellowship. And I'm sure that tastes the money and the power it brought. In the 1992 interview that was mentioned, he talked about having young girlfriends. And obviously, the multi-millionaire bachelor writing lifestyle is what we all dream of. We can all say, I'm doing it for the writing, bro. But all that attention would be nice. Getting some recognition and some money and people adoring you. Obviously, that's the best case scenario for all of us aspiring writers out here. But McCarthy just wrote Blood Meridian. He wrote a peak novel that all these people, Edward Abbey, Guy Davenport, all these other people are like, bro, like, holy crap, this is great. And it sells. It makes him a couple $1,000s. In today's terms, he didn't even make $5,000 for writing Blood Meridian. And so he had to make a change. Something different had to happen. And what that was building a new persona, because this happens all the time. This is another thing that people love to deny, that you have to create a brand, an idea to be able to sell books, to be able to make people care. I line up to buy Cormac McCarthy novels because I just don't love his writing. I also love the person and what he's presented and some of the things that he stands for. This is sports teams and celebrities 101. And with a reclusive author like McCarthy, who acts like he hates publishers and all this, it's easy to say that he doesn't do that. But when we look at the 1992 marketing strategy that went into his success, then you would really understand. Knopf was pushing him very hard, putting him in Esquire, putting like the love scene from All the Pretty Horses in Esquire, then putting a rugged photo of him and all these different rumors. What is that for? Who reads Esquires? Females read Esquire. Then they're going to go tell their husbands about it. Then in the New York Times, which is going to have more of a male readership, the title of the interview is Cormac McCarthy's Venomous Fiction. And it includes all these different, more aggressive aspects of his personality, because there is a 2-hour tape out there of some of the interviews that were conducted in 1992. They're actually at the archive. I've talked to someone who's listened to them all. And it's just McCarthy hanging out and talking about art and writing. And so a lot of that got picked. And I'm sure because the New York Times is connected to New York-based publishing houses, that they curated that article to make it fit with this new persona they were trying to put around McCarthy. When we look at the cover of All the Pretty Horses, I know this one's a little bit blurry, but that's the stoic photo they're talking about over on the left. It's a very minimalistic cover design, and McCarthy's looking like the stoic, rugged individual, and it's very much not his actual personality. But they were trying to push this, and him being reclusive and living in Santa Fe and having these interests in science and violence and having this violent catalog pertains to that. Because when you think, who would write a violent novel? Who writes something like Blood Meridian or Child of God? Especially back then, people would think this kind of weird, rugged individual. But now we know, because of horror movies and whatnot, that people can be into all types of weird stuff and just be typical, artistic, kind, normal citizens in the world. And, just have a couple screwed up things in their head. But back then, that was still somewhat being unconsciously suppressed. This is before Alice in Chains and Nirvana and whatnot. And even rap music was being pushed on the scene and the dark elements of all that. And so I think there was a general willingness on McCarthy's part to play into this because he didn't have to do anything at all. The publishers are doing all this. All he has to do is keep his mouth shut, agree to let his pieces run in Esquire, do, curtailed and controlled interview that's going to make him go in a certain way, and he's going to get a huge result from that. Obviously a lot of money, but obviously the type of respect you want, because what man doesn't want to be viewed as that? Like, I would love to be viewed as a stoic individual. Obviously I've ruined that with this YouTube channel, but this probably plays into one of McCarthy's general fantasies, because as I've talked about on this program before, McCarthy in his Southern novels is actually working through a lot of his trauma from childhood, because McCarthy was raised by a lawyer, a government lawyer whose job was to use eminent domain to throw people off their ancestral land, and he was traumatized by that. And he was a rich kid who went to a private Catholic school. He was one of the more wealthy kids in the area. And so he never got to play out the ideas of criminality, drunkenness, and all these different things. And then he goes to college and does a little bit of that for a year or two. But there was always this romanticization of that, of those people in his mind. And that's why we get 4 novels kind of building and exploring those types of personalities. And then when we look at his Western novels, the West is the most romanticized thing of all. And McCarthy, growing up in Tennessee, the way he would talk about his Western novels and having to go out there and explore. And when you look at the Blood Meridian archives and his research, you could tell that he's like a fanatic about Westerns and these things. And the Western man, especially in the modern world, is stoic. He drives a truck. He doesn't talk about much. And that's what McCarthy is, somewhat trying to do with his personality, because it's not like he doesn't talk about writing. He actually talked about writing with a lot of people at the Santa Fe Institute, but he doesn't want to talk to yuppies or random people about his writing. And McCarthy consciously built on this persona by eventually writing a screenplay for No Country for Old Men, because his first screenplay, Cities of the Plain, worked out for him because that gave him the inspiration for John Grady Cole. And then it threw him into Hollywood. And since then, obviously The Passenger, which was started in 1960, is kind of an exception. We haven't seen McCarthy return to kind of those ambitious roots in the early 1980s and late 1970s. And by not really doing any interviews, this persona could be, fulfilled, because when you look at that interview that got released from the Santa Fe Institute with McCarthy, that's not a tough guy. That's a dude who sits around and reads all day. He's going in to Frank Lloyd Wright's house in Pennsylvania, the one he designed, Falling Water or whatever, and exploring architecture. And he's designing houses and traveling around to explore art and whatnot, and going to Europe and Ireland. Like, the dude who drives the truck, most of the time, and I know that I'm generalizing here, is not that. And the guys that are that, who are just putting on a part, because the PBR, mullet wearing people, love you guys, but they never, unless it's, in the country music genre, are not able to hit those artistic heights, because it requires an open mind. Eventually you shed all those character traits, because to write like Cormac McCarthy, to write like a lot of great authors, you have to leave a lot of those personality things behind. And if you take them with you, it's like I said, it's for marketing or for this, facade. But when you become intelligent enough and emotionally in tuned enough, all that is base level peacocking. And when you feel fulfilled in your heart and you have a wife and all these other things, you don't really need to do that anymore. So what do you guys think of Cormac McCarthy's tough guy persona? What did you think of the article? I'll link it down below. There's some other information in there that I've talked about before, but the information and that photo of McCarthy and Guy Davenport is an absolute classic. And I will see you guys in the next video.